So I'm going to talk a little bit about incident response here. And eventually I'm going to need some MLH participation. Eventually I'm going to need some MLH participation, so you should go get your coworkers. All right. I'm going to talk here about incident response. And when I'm talking about this incident response in this context, I'm talking about incidents where maybe there's a code of conduct violation or an incident of harassment. A lot of these things can apply to things like rule violations or whatever, but we're going to talk about harassment and making a welcoming community because that's incredibly important here. We are working very hard to make sure hackathons are as welcoming as possible, and part of that is responding to incidents when they occur. This is something that can break a hackathon. They're very stressful situations, and I want to give you the tools to make sure that you have the ability to handle incidents. So, we'll start this talk with the very idea that MLH hackathons are a safe space. We, as MLH, fundamentally believe that every hackathon that we help facilitate is safe for everyone. And that means that they feel safe there and they know they're safe there. Beyond that, we really do feel that all hackathons are a safe space, but in this context, we're talking about you as an MLH event. Now, MLH provides you a lot of tools to help deal with incidents, and I'm going to talk about how you use those tools, but I'm also going to talk about generally how to respond to incidents so that in case we're not there, in case you're throwing some event that we're not affiliated with, maybe years down the line, you still know how to handle these things because, like I said, it's important. The first thing you need to do, though, to respond to an incident is to create a safe space. There's a lot of steps that you need to take to create a safe space. The first is just having and publicizing a code of conduct. Now, we have a code of conduct as an MLH event. We require that you that you adopt it, and that you have all of your participants click a checkbox that says they agree to the code of conduct, and that you talk about it at your opening ceremony, and that it applies to everybody at your event. So that means you, it means your vendors, it means your participants, of course, it means sponsors, it means ourselves. It means everybody at your event has to be held to this code of conduct. And you need to set an example. As a hackathon organizer, you're in a place of power. You can set an example for what you want to see. You can do things like use gender-neutral pronouns, or don't use guys, use y'all, things like that. You can set an example. That's important. You should call out small behaviors. If you see somebody in the hallway saying something, like some stupid bad joke, call them out for it. And you don't have to be like, you suck, but you can call them out for it. Because if you call them out in a position of power, they're going to think about it. And maybe you aren't offended by their joke, but maybe somebody next to them is. So you should call people out when they have behaviors that maybe aren't the biggest thing ever, but still need to be responded to. And have a known incident response policy. This is by far the most important thing that you can do. Make sure that everybody who's working with you, this is the volunteers, this is your staff, these folks know how to respond when an incident occurs. And we give you a framework to do that, and I'll actually give you a really well-documented one in a minute. But we'll help. And why do we help? We actually insert ourselves in a lot of situations to make sure that we help in this. So by MLH being here and requiring that you work with us, we increase the report likelihood. Because students don't have to see us in class the next day, they're more likely to report small things and even big things. And you might think, like, I don't want more reports. Like, why would we want to up the report likelihood? Because these are small behaviors that you might not hear about, but it's better if you can deal with them before they become big things. So it increases report likelihood. You also get professional handling. So every MLH team member here has been through training like this, but much more in depth. They all know how to handle an incident, and we have a very specific process involved in handling it. These are scary situations. It's one of the most stressful events that can happen at your hackathon is for some incident of harassment. You want somebody there who's done this before and can help you. We also set a season-wide expectation by making sure that our events all have this code of conduct and we enforce it this same way. people know that all MLH events are a safe space, so they know that your event is a safe space because every other event was a safe space, and vice versa. And we can help enforce across an entire season. We saw a wide variety of responses to the same thing across events before we started stepping in. So in this case, we can make sure that we respond similarly to similar actions. And if there's an attendee who's causing problems at your event, we can say, you're not going to their event. We can make sure that that's enforced over the season, and that's a really powerful thing. So another tool we provide you is actually our code of conduct. As an organizer, you're going to read this and you're going to adopt it. But it's good to go through it anyways. The TLDR is be respectful. Harassment is never tolerated at any MLH event. And anyone at the event, again, participants, sponsors, organizers, yourselves, ourselves, everybody, is subject to this policy. If a participant engages in a harassing behavior, MLH can take any action MLH deems appropriate. And we have reporting guidelines. We have a way to report. So there's some key pieces in this code of conduct. There's an expectation of behavior set. There are detailed how we will react and respond. And additionally, there's a way to get in touch with us even if you can't find us in an event. So it's pretty important to have this and publicize it. So when you're working with us, what should your incident response look like? Well, first, you should come into this with any incident deserves full investigation. I've seen sometimes an organizer will hear something and they'll be like, you know what? It's like somebody comes up to them and say, hey, I have this problem. And an organizer will go, oh, that was so small. Like, let's forget about it. It's not big. Every event, any time a participant deems it worthy to tell you, you should respond to it in the same way. Because this is going to create not only an expectation of behavior, it's also going to help you document it. So even if it was a small thing and it ended up being very small, you can turn back to it 3 months down the line and say, okay, we responded to it still. So the first step that happens when an incident occurs is reporting. A participant will come up to you or your staff member and they'll say, hey, I have something to tell you. And your staff member should immediately go, okay, we're going to go find MLH. If you can't find MLH, call our number. We will be woken up at any time. Tim lives in the UK. He'll get it if I'm asleep, right? Report it to MLH because we will help you centralize your response. Centralizing a response is really important because in these kind of instances, you can have a response fork. You can have two people do two different things. That's not good because it sets two different expectations. It might cause problems. One person might say one thing and another might say something else. That's not good. So we centralize your response by having you come to us. We'll then figure out how to address it. And the first thing to do, I skipped a step back here. The first thing to do is make sure the attendee feels safe. If that means taking them to a separate room, if that means getting them a friend to spend time with them, if that means you staying with them, make sure that they feel safe before you do almost anything else, and we'll help with that. But then you have to address it. And this is something that we will help you do. This is something that we will actually run point on. We will figure out the best response amongst our incident response team, and we will go to the person who's been accused, and we'll tell them what's happening, what somebody came and reported to us, and we'll take their side of the story, because sometimes there is another side of the story. And then we'll react, and we will act somehow, and then we'll follow up. We'll tell the attendee that it got dealt with. We might not tell them the specifics, but we'll tell them it got dealt with. We'll tell the volunteer who maybe took the initial report that it got dealt with. And we might not tell them the specifics, and we might. And then if anybody else knows, we will make sure they know, because this sets the expectation that any incident that happens will be dealt with, because we're telling people it is. So that's how you handle it with us. Now, I want to give you some insight into what we're doing when you bring a participant to us, because I think that's important, and this will help you in the future as well. So, again, first step's reporting. We take a written report immediately. In a private space, we sit down with the participant and we ask them to write out what happened to them. We ask them to write it out for a couple reasons. One, because if you're taking the report down, as somebody who's just hearing it, you can miss important details. You can misconstrue things, and having the attendee write it down, you make sure you have their perspective exactly. Now, if they can't write it, or they feel uncomfortable doing so, we, of course, will write it for them. But throughout either one, we're asking a lot of questions. We're making sure we get who did what and when. And we try and get as precise as possible on all of these points, because there's a big difference between a very blurry report where you don't know exactly what happened or when, and a very, very clear one. And you see this happen as incidents evolve. And we take initial action, and this is ensuring the safety and comfort of the attendee, making sure that they have a friend or whatever. And we exchange our contact information, because throughout this process, we are in constant communication with the attendee, and we need to make sure they know what's going on, so we have their contact information. But we don't do things like invite withdrawal. We don't tell them it's possible to withdraw their report, because that's inviting withdrawal. That's important. We don't ask for advice on how to deal with the complaint, because if we don't act on their advice, they're going to feel wronged. And we're the professionals in this situation, so this is why we have to go through that. Then we centralize the response. I told you, you centralize the response. We do the exact same thing. As soon as the MLH employee at the event hears it, they centralize it with our incident response team. And our incident response team talks, and they're always in constant communication when this occurs. Everybody knows what's going on, so we make sure we don't fork beyond that team. But there are people who are thinking about it, and there's a group of them. So it's not just one lone wolf. And we address it. We come up with a solution, and we go to the attendee, and we inform them. And we hear their side. And then we take action. And the key to this action is that it's a measured response, right? So if it's an offhand comment, we probably don't ban them for the rest of their life. We might issue them a warning, though. We might require them to cease contact. We might revoke privileges. We might remove them from the event. We might ban them from future events. And we might publish an account of the harassment, depending on what happened. And then we follow up. Again, we notify everybody involved, and in certain cases, we might make a public response. You may have been to one of our hackathons where this has happened. And we finalize the report so that we have it, and we give it to you so that you have it. So that's what happens. That's how we deal with those incidents, because we feel that's really important, especially in this community.